Will you no longer take your children back to the UK?
I think it's probably too soon to tell and too soon to say.
The room was unusually quiet for Geneva. A soft hum of ambient air circulated through the space, but there was no formal press. No photographers crowding the doorway. Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, stood near the window, his hands slightly trembling, yet his posture carefully controlled. Every eye in the room lingered on him, sensing that the moment was not ordinary. There was a tension that felt heavier than words could carry. Harry had requested this private setting intentionally. He needed a space where he could speak without interruption, where the walls themselves would hold the weight of what was about to be said. Before we begin today's royal update, I want to take a quick moment. Many of you watch these videos but haven't subscribed yet, and you don't want to miss the latest developments and fascinating stories from the world of royalty. Subscribing is completely free and keeps you up to date as everything unfolds. And while you're here, let us know, where are you watching from? Share it in the comments. It's wonderful to see viewers joining us from around the world. From the very first words, his voice was steady, yet there was an edge, a tremor that betrayed the depth of what he carried inside. "I know it's too late," he began, his eyes tracing invisible patterns on the polished floor. "But I need to say this. I am sorry." The apology carried a weight that felt almost unbearable. It was not directed at the world, not for headlines or sympathy. It was aimed at a single person, yet it echoed across the entire family, across every expectation and assumption held for years. King Charles III, standing across the room with the quiet authority of a monarch, did not immediately respond. His expression was calm, but there was a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. Harry's words hung in the air, echoing softly against the high ceilings. They were the words of someone who had been carrying invisible burdens, shaped not just by personal choices, but by the unrelenting gaze of history. The room seemed to shrink around them, every detail amplified. The distant murmur of traffic outside, the faint ticking of a clock, the subtle tension in the fabric of their clothing. Princess Anne was nearby, a silent witness. Her gaze was direct, measured, and precise. She was not there to react with dramatic gestures. Her presence was methodical, like someone assessing a complicated equation that had been unresolved for years. As Harry spoke, recounting moments of distance and misunderstanding, Anne's attention never wavered. There was a weight in her silence, an unspoken truth that shaped the conversation. She had known things that Harry had not anticipated, revelations that had arrived quietly over time and carried their own implications. Harry's voice faltered for a moment as he detailed his struggles, moments when leaving the royal fold had seemed like liberation, but had instead created unexpected consequences. The isolation, the sudden absence of structure, the constant scrutiny, it all coalesced into a narrative that was deeply personal yet profoundly universal. Standing there, he was both a man seeking forgiveness and a son trying to reconnect with the legacy from which he had stepped away. Charles remained silent, the weight of years evident in the lines around his eyes. He had witnessed departures before, decisions that shaped history quietly, almost imperceptibly. And yet this moment carried something different, a vulnerability not common in the family he represented, a rawness that demanded attention even in its subtlety. Anne's eyes shifted slightly, scanning Harry as if cataloging details, understanding not just the words he spoke, but the gaps between them, the silences that told more than his sentences ever could. The conversation moved through layers of unspoken history. Harry described encounters that had left lasting impressions, moments where he had felt misunderstood, underappreciated, or unseen. Each recollection was precise, deliberate, measured, yet charged with emotion. He did not exaggerate. There was no dramatization. Every word landed with the clarity of someone who had spent years reflecting on the consequences of action and inaction alike. Princess Anne finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. She did not soften her words, but there was a discernible intention behind them, a purpose that went beyond simple conversation. She referenced decisions made in Geneva, connections that had shifted quietly, and the ways in which those decisions had resonated through the family. Her delivery was precise, almost surgical, but beneath it lay the unmistakable humanity of someone navigating complex loyalties. Harry listened, his expression revealing a blend of relief, apprehension, and introspection. There was a recognition forming, a momentary alignment between the man who had stepped away and the institution that had continued without him. Even as the dialogue unfolded, the air remained thick with questions left unspoken, with truths yet to be fully articulated. Each sentence, each subtle gesture, hinted at the layered dynamics that had persisted behind palace doors, in private rooms, and across continents. As the first part of this unprecedented exchange drew to a close, the room did not feel resolved, but charged with potential. The apology had been delivered, but the weight of what it meant extended far beyond those immediate words. Harry, Charles, and Anne now shared a space defined by tension, reflection, and cautious possibility. The narrative of separation, choice, and consequence was only beginning to take its full shape, and the observers in the room could sense that what had started as an apology was the beginning of a story that would continue to unfold, silently yet profoundly, across time and place. The morning light in Geneva filtered through tall, narrow windows, casting elongated shadows across the conference room. Prince Harry walked to the podium with the same measured calm he had displayed before, yet his steps carried the weight of months of reflection and isolation. Dressed simply in a black coat over a dark sweater, he appeared intentionally unadorned, stripped of ceremony and title, a man confronting truths that could not be mediated by protocol or etiquette. From the start, the air was taut with anticipation, even though no one in the room fully understood the scope of what was about to be revealed. Harry's voice carried steadily, carrying more than words. Every pause, every slight inflection, seemed calibrated to communicate both accountability and revelation. He spoke of the choices that had led him away from the United Kingdom, the consequences of seeking autonomy beyond the palace walls, and the gradual erosion of trust in relationships once thought unbreakable. Charles listened from a distance, seated with the composure expected of a monarch, but his hands were clenched lightly, betraying the tension beneath the surface. There were moments when he had imagined this scene, but never with the clarity of Harry's perspective, never with the quiet force of truth that seemed to emanate from the former prince. Princess Anne, standing near the side of the room, maintained her usual precise stance, her gaze never leaving Harry. Every word was catalogued, every nuance absorbed. The revelations began subtly, almost deceptively, with anecdotes of miscommunication, missed opportunities, and moments when Harry had felt manipulated, constrained, or isolated. He described private encounters with Meghan that had started as partnership, but evolved into a pattern of control and strategic maneuvering he had not anticipated. Luxury items, private deals, and selective media appearances formed a backdrop to a life he had once believed was under his own direction. He recounted instances where his voice, once central to initiatives, had been drowned by orchestrated narratives, reducing him to a spectator in his own life. Then the focus shifted. Harry described the anonymous email he had received in early January, the document that had arrived from an encrypted Proton Mail account. It contained PDF files, audio recordings, and internal communications that suggested Meghan had signed a covert deal with a New York media firm in late 2024. The contract allegedly granted the firm access to intimate details of royal family life, personal reflections, and internal dialogues, all without Harry's knowledge or consent. The implications were profound. Trust, once the foundation of his family life, now seemed irrevocably fractured. Harry's recounting was precise, almost methodical, but the tension in his voice hinted at the personal devastation beneath the surface. He described listening to audio snippets taken between 2020 and 2022, conversations he had once believed private, now potentially transformed into content for profit and public consumption. The material painted a narrative that contradicted public assurances of discretion, highlighting the contrast between what had been promised and what had occurred behind the scenes. Anne's presence was unyielding. She had always been the observer and mediator when subtle shifts threatened the family's cohesion. As Harry spoke, she noted the ramifications of each revelation, mentally tracing how the exposure of this material could impact not just Harry's relationship with Charles, but the broader perception of the monarchy. Her assessment was silent but sharp. She had anticipated crises before, yet the unfolding narrative carried a new complexity, an interplay of personal betrayal, media exploitation, and the fragile mechanisms of family diplomacy. Charles remained largely silent, his expression unreadable, though his mind worked swiftly behind measured eyes. He had seen public apologies before, symbolic gestures meant to restore faith or repair image. This, however, was different. Harry was not seeking media sympathy or public validation. He was articulating a personal truth, exposing layers of deception and manipulation that intersected with both family loyalty and institutional integrity. The words hovered in the room, dense with consequence, leaving no easy path toward resolution. The emotional gravity shifted when Harry described his own response to these revelations. Months of reflection, quiet research, and personal reckoning had culminated in a decision that would redefine his future. He had formally renounced his California residency, severing ties with the life he had built with Meghan. It was not a decision taken lightly, and yet it carried an unmistakable clarity. He was stepping away from illusions, from performative freedom, and from a narrative he no longer recognized as his own. Anne listened with a careful balance of empathy and institutional awareness. She had been quietly facilitating potential arrangements for limited child visitation, ensuring that Harry's connection to Archie and Lily could be preserved under controlled circumstances. Yet even she recognized that the Geneva revelations had crossed thresholds. Certain paths could no longer be taken without compromising the integrity of the monarchy or the delicate privacy of the children. Her silence was purposeful, a reminder that sometimes action and reaction existed on different planes entirely. Harry's reflections were punctuated by recollections of the public scrutiny that had shadowed him since his departure from royal life. From Netflix appearances to media tour, the calculated visibility of Meghan contrasted sharply with the quiet marginalization he had experienced. Each incident, each slight, each overlooked contribution added to a mounting awareness that freedom without clarity was another form of confinement. The Geneva Forum became both stage and sanctuary, a space where truth could be stated plainly, without spin or filter, where accountability and disclosure intersected in a moment of raw honesty. The Geneva conference room had emptied, yet the tension lingered like a fog refusing to lift. Harry remained seated for several long moments, staring at the polished wood table, the weight of his revelations pressing down on him. His apology to Charles, though heartfelt and unambiguous, had left a tangible silence in the room, a silence heavy with unspoken consequences. Charles rose from his chair slowly, the air around him charged with quiet authority. His expression, a complex tapestry of disappointment, concern, and lingering paternal affection, reflected the difficult calculus of a father and monarch navigating a storm that had already been brewing for years. He did not rush toward Harry with words of forgiveness, nor did he retreat into cold detachment. Instead, he measured his response carefully, as if each phrase must balance familial bonds with institutional responsibility. Anne, ever the sentinel of clarity and order, stepped forward with a composed intensity. She addressed Harry directly, acknowledging the courage it took to confront the truths laid bare in Geneva. Her voice, steady yet empathetic, reminded him that acknowledgement was only the first step. Actions would carry the real weight. Decisions made in the heat of revelation would ripple across the family, affecting not only public perception but the very fabric of their private lives. Harry spoke again, this time recounting moments that had been difficult even to articulate aloud. He detailed the first time he realized the depth of Meghan's covert dealings with media entities, how subtle shifts in their interactions, private promises broken, and unauthorized disclosures had slowly eroded trust. Each story was a careful layering of personal betrayal, strategic missteps, and the stark realization that freedom without transparency was ultimately hollow. Charles absorbed every word, occasionally nodding slightly, occasionally closing his eyes to digest the scope of what he had just heard. The monarchy, a centuries-old institution built on tradition and public perception, was suddenly facing a new dimension of internal conflict, one that could no longer be contained by protocol or private counsel. Harry's honesty had lifted a veil, exposing not only personal fractures but also vulnerabilities that could have far-reaching consequences for the crown. Anne interjected at one point, clarifying the impact of these revelations on the younger generation, particularly Archie and Lily. She emphasized the importance of shielding them from the public spectacle while maintaining structured connections with their father. Her words, measured and deliberate, underscored the delicate balance between personal healing and institutional preservation. The Geneva revelations, she warned, were not a private affair alone. They had implications for legacy, lineage, and the perception of the monarchy in the eyes of the world. Harry's narrative took a reflective turn as he recounted the quiet nights of isolation that had followed his realization of Meghan's actions. He described moments of introspection in which he questioned every decision, every alliance, and every assumption about loyalty and intention. The process had been painful, often isolating, but ultimately clarifying. He acknowledged mistakes of his own, moments where naivety or misplaced trust had contributed to the unfolding crisis. There was no defensiveness in his tone, only the stark illumination of lessons painfully learned. Charles finally spoke, his voice deliberate and composed. He addressed the institutional implications first, noting the delicate balance of family transparency and royal discretion. Then, more personally, he addressed Harry as a father and son. The words were measured, conveying disappointment, concern, and cautious optimism simultaneously. Forgiveness was not instantaneous, nor was it unconditional, but the path toward reconciliation had been tentatively opened. Anne observed both men, her presence a stabilizing force. She had always acted as the bridge between rigid tradition and evolving realities, and now her role had become even more crucial. She reminded both Charles and Harry that the unfolding events in Geneva were not the conclusion, they were a catalyst. What followed would determine the nature of trust, accountability, and relational integrity for years to come. The emotional gravity of the day reached its peak when Harry described his own next steps. He had decided to relocate temporarily to a secluded estate in Scotland, a space where reflection could continue uninterrupted, and where he could begin rebuilding his life on terms aligned with personal values rather than public expectation. There was no dramatics in his announcement, only the quiet certainty of a man determined to reclaim agency over his narrative. The morning after Harry's Geneva revelations, the world seemed to hold its breath. International headlines carried fragments of his speech, but few captured the full depth of what had transpired. Social media was ablaze with speculation, theories, and recriminations. Every clip, every statement was dissected, and the ripple effect of the forum spread far beyond the Swiss city. Harry's confession of betrayal, his acknowledgement of manipulated choices, and his exposure of Meghan's covert media dealings had shifted the narrative dramatically. Back at Buckingham Palace, the corridors were unusually quiet. Staff moved deliberately, acutely aware of the media storm building outside the gates. Charles convened an emergency meeting with senior aides, legal advisors, and communications directors. The atmosphere was tense. Decisions needed to be made swiftly, with precision, and without leaving room for public misinterpretation. The monarchy was accustomed to crises, but rarely had a revelation combined personal betrayal, media exposure, and the very public acknowledgement of internal fractures. Anne, ever vigilant, briefed the team with clarity and unflinching honesty. She emphasized that while Harry's words were personal, their implications were institutional. Trust had been fractured, not just between family members, but between the crown and the public. Anne highlighted the delicate challenge, maintaining the family's integrity while protecting the younger generation, particularly Archie and Lily, from media intrusion. Every decision now had to consider long-term perception, the psychological welfare of the children, and the preservation of the monarchy's legacy. Meanwhile, Harry returned to his temporary residence in Hampshire, the weight of his choices pressing heavily upon him. The silence of the estate was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. No flashes of cameras, no reporters pounding on gates, just the quiet, almost oppressive stillness of reflection. He walked the gardens alone, thinking through every step that had led him here, every relationship strained or broken, every misjudgment that had compounded the betrayals. His apology to Charles, though genuine, had shifted little in the immediate sense. Reconciliation, he realized, would take time, patience, and more than words. The public, however, had other plans. International media outlets analyzed every detail of his Geneva appearance, often ignoring the nuances of his apology while highlighting the allegations about Meghan. Headlines alternated between sympathy for a father fighting to reclaim his narrative and outrage over private family matters exposed to the world. Social commentary was relentless, and even loyalists of the monarchy struggled to parse personal accountability from institutional consequences. The palace communication team remained silent publicly, but behind closed doors, strategies were being recalibrated. William and Catherine's response was deliberate and measured. While no formal statements were issued, their schedules reflected a clear intent: maintain stability, avoid engagement with the controversy, and project calm assurance. Public appearances were carefully choreographed. William's interactions with the press were cordial but distant, while Catherine continued her philanthropic engagements with poise and composure. Sources within Kensington Palace emphasized that the Geneva revelations were treated as a private family matter, yet the public perception demanded management. Every gesture, every photograph, was now scrutinized under a lens shaped by Harry's words. Anne's role grew more critical as the week progressed. She coordinated discreet meetings with Harry's legal representatives to establish a framework that allowed him continued access to his children while protecting their privacy. Discussions centered on neutral locations, controlled environments, and clear boundaries with Meghan. Anne's interventions were calculated, combining empathy with strategic foresight. She understood that the monarchy could not simply intervene without considering both the optics and the children's welfare. Her insistence on measured action highlighted the delicate balance between familial support and institutional preservation. In Geneva, whispers of the forum's significance reached elite diplomatic circles. Harry's acknowledgement of being monetized and manipulated resonated with organizations advocating for ethical media practices. Yet the revelation about Meghan's secret agreements stirred speculation among investors, media executives, and global philanthropists. Questions arose about the intersection of personal narrative, public influence, and financial gain. Harry's decision to speak, though devoid of spectacle, carried ramifications far beyond the royal family, signaling a challenge to opaque media operations that had long profited from intimate access to royalty. Back in Hampshire, Harry began to structure his new life around clarity and focus. Daily routines were established, quiet walks, gardening, and private writing sessions forming the backbone of his days. He reflected on his children's needs, his own sense of agency, and the responsibilities he could still uphold. Despite the chaos surrounding him, there was a subtle sense of reclaiming control. No longer swept along by performative obligations or media narratives, he sought to define life by principles he could live with, even if the path meant solitude. By midweek, the global media machine had caught up with the implications of the Geneva speech. Analysts debated whether Harry's revelations could influence future media contracts, philanthropic ventures, or even the monarchy's handling of private information. Discussions around Meghan's strategic repositioning, combined with Harry's public statements, created a complex web of narratives. Every decision, both past and present, was scrutinized for alignment with loyalty, ethics, and transparency. As the days unfolded, the palace prepared for further strategic communications. Anne continued her behind-the-scenes work, coordinating controlled interactions between Harry's representatives and select family members. Her efforts emphasized a crucial point. While reconciliation might be impossible for now, the children's well-being remained non-negotiable. Each move was deliberate, structured, and carefully aligned with both moral and institutional imperatives. The Geneva revelations had accomplished more than exposure. They had forced every actor involved to confront uncomfortable truths, personal failures, and the fragility of trust. Harry's courage in speaking out had altered the landscape irrevocably, but it had also placed the family in a position where decisions would define not just the present, but the legacy of their lineage. The tension that had gripped Buckingham Palace and Hampshire for days reached its zenith as the weekend approached. Harry's Geneva revelations had not only fractured relationships, but had forced the family to confront realities long suppressed. Charles, ever measured but now visibly burdened, convened another private meeting. The room was quiet except for the soft shuffle of papers and the occasional click of a pen. Every advisor, every aide knew that the consequences of Harry's speech were far-reaching. The apology, heartfelt yet belated, hung in the air like a fragile bridge. One misstep could collapse it entirely. Anne remained a stabilizing force. She had spent hours with Harry's representatives, crafting guidelines to protect the children, navigating the labyrinth of media scrutiny, and mitigating potential misunderstandings with tact and precision. Her diligence emphasized that while reconciliation might remain distant, practical measures could shield Archie and Lily from the fallout. She reminded Charles that loyalty to the family did not mean ignoring reality. It meant adapting to it. Her words carried the weight of experience, reminding everyone that the monarchy's survival depended on both strategy and compassion. Harry, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. The quiet of Hampshire allowed him to reflect, but reflection came with heavy consequences. He understood that his apology to Charles, though necessary, did not erase years of perceived betrayal. Every action he had taken, every public statement, every private misstep was now magnified under the glare of global attention. There were moments of profound regret, of choices made in haste, of words spoken in frustration, and of loyalties misunderstood. Yet there was also clarity. The path forward demanded accountability, patience, and the courage to face what he could not undo. Meghan's absence from the public eye only intensified speculation. Observers wondered whether her silence indicated agreement with Harry's statements, a strategic retreat, or something more calculated. Whispers of secret agreements, financial negotiations, and media deals circulated relentlessly. The tension was almost tangible. Each silence, each delay in response became a statement in itself. The world waited, not for entertainment, but for the resolution of a drama that combined familial loyalty, public perception, and the intricate politics of power. In London, William and Catherine maintained their careful poise. Public appearances were meticulously staged to project stability, calm, and continuity. Yet behind the scenes, their concern was palpable. Discussions about managing the narrative, addressing loyalist expectations, and maintaining public trust occupied hours of private deliberation. Every gesture, every smile, every hand wave was calculated to convey a sense of order, while the emotional undercurrents threatened to spill over. The palace became a chessboard, each move deliberate, each countermove measured. By midweek, Anne arranged a series of controlled meetings. Harry, guided by trusted advisors, engaged in candid conversations with Charles and William. Words that had once seemed impossible to speak were exchanged in hushed tones, away from cameras and microphones. There were moments of tension, silence stretching uncomfortably, yet there were also glimmers of understanding. Charles, though hurt, recognized the complexity of Harry's position. William, while cautious, acknowledged the shared responsibility of family. The conversations did not erase past grievances, but they planted seeds for a potential path forward, a delicate reconciliation that prioritized truth over spectacle. The media, however, continued to press relentlessly. Every snippet, every leak, every photograph fueled speculation. Analysts dissected the family dynamics, theorizing on alliances, fractures, and shifting loyalties. Yet amid the chaos, Harry found solace in routine. Gardening, private reflection, and time with his children grounded him. There was no escaping the scrutiny, but there was a growing determination to define his life on his own terms, guided by honesty and the lessons of past mistakes. Anne's strategic oversight proved critical. She managed communications, protected the family's privacy, and balanced public expectations with internal realities. Her influence ensured that even as tensions escalated, the family's core integrity remained intact. Decisions were weighed carefully, not in reaction to media frenzy, but in alignment with long-term stability. Every intervention, every plan, reinforced the delicate equilibrium between public perception and personal accountability. As days passed, the monarchy slowly began to stabilize. The shockwaves of Geneva did not vanish, but patterns of control and measured engagement emerged. Harry's acknowledgement of past errors, coupled with structured apologies and transparent communication, shifted public perception gradually. The family recognized that trust, once fractured, required time and consistent effort to restore. Yet there was cautious optimism that the painful revelations could become a foundation for honesty, accountability, and a future less driven by secrecy.